Good evening and welcome into Turning Point Tonight. Together, we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. My name is Jobob. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tonight, we have a very special guest that I'm very excited to talk to about his perspective on his own process in decision-making, as well as how the country's going and what our trajectory going forward looking. Please help me welcome Dr. Ben Carson to the show. Dr. Carson, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Delighted to be here with you.
You know, Dr. Carson, just to start off initially, you've talked a lot about bridging the divide and kind of unifying the country. We on the conservative side of the aisle generally tend to say often that we have more in common than we have in difference. Can you kind of speak to what it might take to bridge the gap, especially considering how deep the political divide seems to be in the modern era?
Well, interestingly enough, there was a time when Democrats and Republicans argued, but they had the same goal. They had different ways of getting there, but they had the same goal. Now the problem is they don't have the same goal.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes things much more contentious. One side wants a country that's upformed by the people. One side wants a country that's upformed by the government. And it becomes increasingly difficult to reconcile those two policies. But the key thing is if we start out by putting the facts in the middle of the table and then discuss things based on the facts instead of based on opinion, I think that's the way that we can begin to make some progress. Also, as the Bible says, with your enemies, be nice to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like putting coals of fire in their hair. They don't like that. And there are those who actually intend to divide us. If you go back and you look at the congressional record, January the 10th, 1963, more than 60 years ago, way before you were born, Congressman Herlong of Florida wrote in the 45 goals of communism in America, how they plan to conquer us. And you'd be amazed at how many they've accomplished already. Things like gaining control of the school system and the teacher unions, indoctrinate the kids, gaining control of Hollywood, television, and news media so you could change the culture in America, diminishing the role of fathers, denigrating the role of families, increasing the role of government, making sexual perversion normal, natural, and healthy, denigrating the role of the church, making the social gospel the thing rather than the real gospel. I mean, it's pretty amazing just as you go down that list. And it's a clever ideal. They knew that they could conquer us militarily, so why not destroy you from within by attacking your faith and your families? And our families have been decimated.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear you say that. I think one of the most interesting things that I've seen in the modern era is this idea that, well, name me a Christian conservative artist, right? In the last 50 years or so, the art world has been dominated, the culture world really has been dominated by progressive lefties. But if you go back past that, the entire litany of the last 2,000 years have been Christian art and Christian culture. Can you kind of speak to how do we get that sense back? I think there's a resurgence in the church happening now. We kind of see it all around us. How do we help facilitate that from like the media space in this and maybe even in our local communities?
Well, I think the key thing is to talk about it, not to be afraid, because the reason the left has succeeded is because people who think the right way have been timid. They stand in the corner and stare at their feet, hoping that no one will call them a nasty name or try to cancel them. And, you can't be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. You got to be willing to stand up for the things that you believe in. And I see more people doing that now, as I go around the country, particularly in the different universities in conjunction with Turning Point USA. I see a lot of kids who are now willing to stand up for what they believe. They used to hide in the shadows.
Yeah.
They wear their MAGA hats. They have their American flags on. And I'm seeing that phenomenon everywhere. And people are also, proclaiming their faith. Look at some of these revivals that have occurred on some of these campuses.
Yeah.
Just of revivals. because I think people have seen that the other direction is leading us to destruction. And you see the kind of philosophies that are coming out of it. It's okay for men to play in women's sports and to beat the heck out of women. That's okay. Why wouldn't you do that? It's okay to confuse children about their gender when their brains aren't fully developed,
Yeah.
and do it so that their parents don't know, because the parents will protect them. I mean, I think if you think logically about it, you realize that those kinds of policies are not working for us. It's okay to have open borders and to let anybody into our country, not
Mhm.
thinking about what are the long-term consequences of that. That's the
Yeah.
problem. But I think our young people are waking up, and I'm proud of them.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see. I've been fortunate enough to be on the road with Charlie Kirk, and the crowds have just grown and grown and grown. And I'm sure you've seen it at Turning Point events that you've done. And it's almost entirely students, which is which is crazy. Just 3,000 students in a place. So it's good to see. Dr. Carson, I'd love to narrow kind of down on your perspective. You've had obviously a storied career at the HUD department, but also as a neurosurgeon. In those positions, you'd have to make split decisions that really affect people's life. What is your process of making a big decision, whether you have a long period of time or a very, very short window of time to make what you think is the best decision in your opinion?
Well, I do what's called a best worst analysis. I
Mm,
ask 4 questions. What's the best thing that happens if I do this? What's the worst thing that happens if I do this? What's the best thing that happens if I don't do this? What's the worst thing that happens if I don't do this?
mhm.
And by asking those 4 questions and answering them, it generally will put you on the right pathway. And a lot of times when people don't ask those questions and
Mhm.
something happens, they say, "Why didn't I ask myself that question?"
Yeah. Wow. So simple as that. Um,
I
this
actually
that
wrote, actually wrote a book about it.
yeah, yeah, I'm aware. That's I encourage people to go check that out. Part of the other elements that you've been so vocal about is education being the way forward to get out of poverty, to get out of bad situations. Now that is somewhat of a contentious issue because then people go, well, then why are you trying to abolish the Department of Education? And again, I don't necessarily know your opinion on that specifically, but I've heard you say a couple times, where true education lies outside of the school system. How can parents, outside of going to school board meetings, because we all know that's a good idea, but how can parents kind of facilitate that growth in education to make sure their kids have all of the opportunities that can be afforded to them?
Well, first of all, you can't just tell them to do things, you have to show them.
Hmm.
So, lead by example, get your book out, read with them.
Hmm.
One of the things that really impressed me when I was still practicing is parents would come to me and they would say, the pediatrician wants me to start little Johnny or little Susan on such and such medication for attention deficit disorder. And
Oh.
I would say, oh, before you do that, let me ask you a couple of questions. I said, can they watch television? Oh, yeah, they can watch television all day. Uh, can they play video? Oh, all day and all night. I said, I'll tell you what, before we start them on the medication, for the next 3 months, I want you to wean them off of those things and substitute quality time with you reading and discussing the material. And then when you come back, let me know if you still need the medication. In most cases, they did not need the medication anymore.
Yeah.
It's a pseudo phenomenon. And, you take a little kid from the time they're born, as soon as they can sit up, what do? Prop them up in front of the TV. Zip,
Man.
zip, zoom, zoom, zoom. They get a little older, they get a little manual dexterity. You give them the controls to the video game. Zip, 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 zoom, zoom, zoom. Now all of a sudden they're 5 or 6, and you put them in a classroom, and the teacher's not turning to something every few seconds. You think they're going to pay attention? Probably not.
Yeah.
So we need to spend a little more time with our children. And there's a reason that God formed families.
Mm.
And, you know, we have a real problem with family formation right now. And with childbirth, we've gone in the 60s from an average of 3.6 births per woman to 1.6 now.
Yeah. Wow.
That's going to have a dramatic impact on our population if we don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, you know, if I were to characterize, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like, sometimes parenting is difficult, but it's worth the struggle through not putting them in front of an iPad because, it may have repercussions down the road that aren't exactly in the best interest of the kid. If that's, hope I'm characterizing that correctly.
That's correct. And in my case, you know, one of the things that I hated, in fact, the thing that I hated the most growing up was poverty. Some people hate rats and roaches and snakes, and I hated poverty. That is until my mother made me start reading books. And as I began to read about explorers and entrepreneurs and engineers and scientists and surgeons, I began to understand that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you is you.
Yeah.
It's not circumstances, it's not some other person. And when I realized that, poverty didn't bother me anymore because I knew it was temporary. I knew I could
Wow.
actually.
Wow. Now that actually would lead into my next question, which I would love for you to answer. But Dr. Ben Carson is chatting with us. He'll be right back after the break to discuss my question of, well, how did you define success? Because I think that's a great little lead into that. Turning Point Tonight will be right back. Don't go away.